Welcome to Containerized Conversations, where we try to containerize our conversation to less than 20 minutes. I'm your co-host, Jesse Caffarelli.
And I'm your co-host, Josh Warhurst. And Jesse, today you're going to interview me.
So I thought this would actually be a great idea. And the big reason is, in our first episode, we actually talked about how SRE and DevOps and PE, like there's so many different names for DevOps roles. And companies can't really decide on how they do it or not. But you are a resident professional in platform engineering. And so I thought it would be fantastic if we can do a little interview where you can kind of answer some questions. And maybe not only will our audience members get a little bit more understanding on what is PE and how does it differ from DevOps, but also maybe they can get some pretty good tips on how to either start it up in their companies or how they could improve upon it if they're hitting some problems. Because I know for a fact you've hit a lot of problems.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, we can. Why don't you ask about that, and we'll get to it.
We will get to it. Let's not jump too far. Because first I want to start off from the beginning. You started up in this startup, and you started from the very beginning. Walk us through, what did you do from the beginning, and from there, how did it kind of transform into more of a platform engineering role?
Yeah, that's a good point. So when the company started, it was a very small company. When I joined, it was 50 people. Now I know for a lot of people that's a big company. They're coming from these companies of like 10 people, 5 people. This was the first year though. I joined before the company had hit the 1 year mark, and it was a young robotics company. So the focus of everybody there was on robotics. And I was an embedded developer. I should say I was on the
Oh,
electrical
okay.
engineering team.
Oh, wow. Okay. So like,
And
were you doing software development at that time, or were you
yes,
like electrical?
it was a combo because at this point everybody wore a ton of hats. So the mechanical engineers were doing electrical work. The electrical engineers were doing software. The software engineers were talking to the people who were trying to integrate other pieces of software. So
Yeah.
everything was kind of connected. I was working as an electrical engineer who did software and specifically firmware. So we designed our own PCBs, the printed circuit boards that would go in the robot.
Yeah.
So we weren't buying our own PCBs. One thing that was really tough about that was that everything is also hasn't really been done before. I shouldn't say that, like people have made PCBs before,
Yeah.
but everybody when they're designing it, like we had a magnetic sensor, right? It detected if there was a magnet nearby. And that magnetic sensor, people weren't so concerned about how you got your software onto the magnetic sensor. They just cared that, hey, this thing that exists, does it work correctly?
Yeah.
Right? So the focus early on was not software deployment. And I came at it from a firmware standpoint where we have these little JTAG cables, and the way that we would program the thing was just plugging in the JTAG connector and the binary that we built on our computer,
Yeah.
downloading that onto the firmware.
No build pipelines,
No
like
build, the build
no
pipeline was
testing.
what we had on our computer was everything. So now don't get me wrong, it wasn't like DevOps didn't exist when this company came around, right? This is 2017 that I'm talking about. But in the hardware world, in the firmware world, we're not buying like a computer off the shelf that comes with its own suite of stuff.
Yeah.
We're making our own boards,
Huh.
and the thought of how the computer gets programmed was secondary. Now, there are people that are designing this and they're thinking long term, how do we make sure that we can get the updates to the robot without plugging in
Yeah.
to 10 different boards,
Yeah.
opening the robot up and plugging in? For the Gen 1 of a lot of these boards, they did not care about
Yeah.
over the air updates,
Well,
right?
and what was this product? How many bots were in it? Did you guys have to worry about scale at all?
We were more concerned that like the power supply worked,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we didn't have that many bots. Now, inside of one of these bots, we had like 6 PCBs that were distinct. So if you wanted to update all the PCBs on the robot, you needed to do this to 6 different pieces. And then within one of the PCBs was effectively the main CPU, and that ran the actual embedded bot code. So I was more concerned though early on with, does my magnetic sensor code work? Does the power supply or the cat bank code work? Right? At the very beginning, we had maybe 6 robots. And if there's 6 boards on these robots, that's 36 boards to update. That's 36 things that you have to plug into. And, maybe I only want to update every single magnetic sensor, right? If there's 6 bots, there's 2 magnetic sensors on each bot. So that's 12 boards. I just have to go and take the bots while they're out, pull off the things, plug them in. For a lot of people, I think the amount of time that takes, it wasn't that much. When did it change? First of all, we need the capability to do it. The Gen 1 boards, the first ones that we made, did not have that capability to do it. We didn't even have the Gen 1 to have the boot and reset pins.
Yeah.
So we literally could not over the air update
Yeah.
with the first batch. The second batch, I think we had maybe closer to like 40 robots.
Yeah.
And at that point, it starts being a real pain in the butt. And that's when it became really important to send updates over the air, for instance. A lot of this was not principled. It wasn't, oh, we should do this because it's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Or we need to make this change because this is industry best practices.
Yeah.
It was, this is a huge pain in the butt. Let's go and fix it. Let's go and find a solution. We came to some DevOps practices through necessity.
Just a natural scale of your company.
Yeah. The second big catalyst point was we had people that we first called bot wranglers, which were less trained people who were handling the massive amount of bots that we had, right?
Yeah.
So these were not programmers. These people, when they first came in, didn't understand Linux commands.
Yeah. Yeah.
Copying a file over to the machine was something that you had to teach them. And all the developers are doing things. They're all Linux people. They're all doing these commands. And they go and say to somebody who's untrained, hey, go and run this command, open up 12 terminals, right? And run this command on every single terminal, right? Just copy paste. It'll be easy, right? Oh, but you have to change this one variable for each one of them.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
Yeah.
That was the first moment where people started saying, this is not going to work.
Yes, that's really fascinating. So it actually blossomed from 2 reasons. And we're kind of tripping into this whole idea of this platform. Not only did you need to create a way to easily update it, but you also needed a way for maybe not as technical people to be interfaced with these bots. What's awesome about that story is just how natural you guys started tripping into the whole platform.
And some of it was not elegant. It was the kind of solutions that like Linux developers think about, right? So the first thing was called Overlord, and Overlord was basically a text window that opened up and it had like 10 commands and they were mapped to like keys, right? Like 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And so you could run a command by pressing 3 and you still had to open up 10 terminals. But it was sort of a text-based command that made sense to Linux developers.
Yeah.
And you could teach somebody. Now, this didn't prevent people from missing updates of certain devices. And there was a lot of note-taking. If you looked at the computer that the people were doing the work on, there were sticky notes everywhere. There was notepads, people keeping track of everything. And whenever they did like a shift change, like somebody came in to replace them,
Yeah.
there was a lot of transfer of knowledge sessions needed.
Yeah.
Just the amount of time it took
Yeah.
to get these people to get everything straight.
Yeah. So this is basically when you started working on the platform.
This is the start of it. I had like 4 PCBs where I was essentially the code owner.
Yeah.
Right. So I was focused early on how do I get those people sitting at the desk to upload all of my devices.
Oh,
Right.
interesting. Okay.
So I'm making custom commands in the Overlord script, for instance, so that they can press this to upload my thing. So I don't have to
Mm,
do it
yeah.
10,000 times. And around 2020, we actually said, okay, I was at this point, I had felt confident with the electrical embedded code I had done.
Hmm.
I said, hey, I am just in a maintaining phase with this code. And at this point, I said, what's the big pain point? Right? The big pain point was how we got our code on the devices. We still
Yeah.
hadn't really solved that problem. At that point, we started to heavily invest in making something that was very user friendly,
Yeah.
that still did effectively the same thing that the terminals did, which was SSHing into devices
Yes.
and running commands, except packaging it in a way that anybody could go and click the buttons and update the devices. And the bots were the first thing that mattered, because at that point we already had like 100 of them.
The fact is that you were the perfect candidate because you're building a platform for the people that you used to do their jobs. And you were in their shoes before, and you started building a platform. And the reason why it was so successful was because you already knew all of the pain points.
The fact that you mentioned during our full stack conversation that you've been involved with all the different pieces. I had been involved with all the pain points, and I
Yeah.
knew all these people individually. You're a young startup. You know everybody. You know everybody. You know their struggles, their pain. It's not a huge company where you say, I've never met those people. Everybody is somebody that you know their pain, and you're sitting there at 8 p.m. listening to them talk about how they had to update your thing because you couldn't go in that
Yeah.
day, and you start saying, okay, you're right. So at that point, we had a young graduate who I said, hey, you want to take over all these embedded projects? They're kind of in maintenance phase. I switched over to developing the tool that would replace all the manual action. At that point, we're still building things. We're using Jenkins pipelines to build our artifacts, and we're storing them on a file server that's local. And people are still downloading their artifacts and sending them to the developers. And we said, okay, you know what? The first thing that we should do is make sure that people aren't fat fingering things. People aren't typing the wrong commands. So we went through, and the most important thing early on was making sure that we had a history of what commands we had actually
Yeah.
run. That was something that was kept track of via post-it notes and paper, and people forgot about it the day. So we made sure we had a history of the commands that you ran, and that the commands could be simple, right?
Yeah.
It was updating 100 devices with the exact same config. We said,
Yeah.
okay, we're going to have a single config, and then you can apply this to every single device, right?
Yeah.
So that was how that program started. The most important things were usability from a user perspective,
Yeah.
right? So not necessarily the developer perspective, but how does the person sitting at the table updating the thing, how's their experience? And having the history so that people knew what happened. So during those transition periods, there was no mystery.
Yeah. So you saw this problem that needed to be solved, and you knew how to solve it because you were in those shoes. So then you started building out this platform, and the platform was very successful. People loved it. They started using it. The company started scaling and started getting bigger and bigger. What were some scaling problems that you hit? And how did you handle packaging up this product and releasing it?
Yeah, early on, the main tools that we actually uploaded it manually, right? We still used a build pipeline, but we did the actual upload process to the site. It was pretty simple to just go into the different 3 sites and do this thing. We had actually, because it would go down occasionally, we had a secondary instance, and it wasn't like we had a load balancer that said, hey, send it to one or the other. It was just, hey, if this thing is down, we have a test version add this port number in the browser and you can get to it. This was definitely the period when I didn't realize that my job was an on-call job because people were starting to use this thing. It was pretty stable,
Hmm.
and people were mostly using it during regular business hours because that's when they were doing the main update options. But my days would often be sitting in the labs watching people use it. And then when it broke, I would say, okay, let's go and fix this. I would have my computer, I'd pop it out, and we would go and like restart the Docker container or fix some value. When we started to scale, the next thing that we started to scale up was more devices.
Yeah.
The bots had been a success story in the company. Everybody
Yeah.
said, wow, we have these people who had no knowledge of the system and they can start updating the devices.
Yeah.
So it was considered a success. And the powers that be said, hey, can you go and do this for all the other things that aren't bots? Our system at this point had, maybe a dozen VMs with different Docker containers. The bot stuff can keep us busy actually for a long time. But sure, let's
Hmm.
go and start looking at all these other devices. And we looked at a couple different technologies. We selected Ansible as the thing to provision the VMs, not just what's going to be on the VM, but actually starting up the Docker containers.
What you're saying is this product, at first it was just for bash scripts going into bots, but then it also became some sort of Ansible controller. So essentially you were creating like an abstraction layer away from the end user, and you could help automate these sites, or they could actually automate these sites, but they didn't know they were using Ansible. They didn't know they were using Bash or Linux.
Right. They to your point, they knew nothing about the underlying processes. Right. At the end of the day, we were just running an Ansible command
Yeah.
and we were feeding it in values for like a custom inventory that was based on config values, but it looked the exact same as updating the bots, which did not use Ansible,
Yeah.
which were using all these other custom update tools
Yeah.
that people had developed.
Yeah.
The important part was that for the end user, didn't see any difference between the devices. They said, if I want
Yeah.
to update that, I can press update that. I don't
Yeah.
really care about the tool. We made some custom scripts so that people could see the power of Ansible.
Yeah.
Fortunately, for a lot of these people who didn't care about automation, they said, that's great, we're keeping that.
Yeah.
And they didn't go off and do their own thing. They just said, okay, you guys wrote some Ansible. We're just going to keep with this Ansible thing.
Yeah. That's great.
It was great. The problem with it was that it was so successful that a lot of these other teams never went back and actually improved their update scripts. Now you could say that's great. They hadn't changed their update script for 2 years. And so building it from scratch was a foreign concept to them. They said, oh, no, when you provision a new VM, you just have Jerry go in and he's going to run different commands. And I said, can you tell me what those commands are? And like, no, I can't tell you what those are. You can talk to Jerry, and Jerry didn't know, and it was a whole thing.
So you bring up a really interesting point. As you do platform engineering, so you kind of introduce this abstraction layer. Like, I guess there's three layers. There's the automation that's underneath that does the actual work. There's the abstraction layer that sits on top. And then there's the actual physically using it. Now, in your mind, does the platform engineer do all of that? Or are those all separate groups?
In the perfect world, I think each development team would have knowledge of how their product is deployed. Our job would be to make sure that we can take that and make it seamless to the end user. I think my main customer was the end users. I
Mm,
think in a different platform engineering environment, your main customer is the developers. And I can go either way with that. I think that sometimes we want to make the process easy. And we did make the process easy for developers. We said, hey, here's Ansible.
yeah,
It's human readable. It's pretty standard. Here are
yeah,
some custom libraries that you can use. If you want Docker on your VM, you can use this Docker
yeah,
setup role.
yeah,
We have a bunch of different tasks to make the development experience easier, but At the end of the day, the most important customer was the end user, the person who was going to be running these commands. And we wanted to make sure that they didn't worry about the underlying code.
What you guys were doing was trying to provide this Apple iPhone experience. To the end user, they just hit update my iOS. They don't know what it's doing. You guys created the ability for the customer to hit that. And then the developers should own the automation portion of it, which is what actually did the iOS update. Is that kind of what you're explaining?
I think that's close to it. It's if we had to optimize for one of the two, right, the end user or the developer, I think ideally you get both.
Yeah.
Ideally, the developer says, updating my device on this platform is very easy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I don't even think about it. And we did have some of that. We had the developers who said, I don't know how it gets to the store. I just write my code and I get some value and I give
Yeah.
that value to the person at the store and everything works,
Yeah.
right? And so that was very satisfying. But with the iPhone example, yes, we're trying to make it an easy button where one person presses it, they don't have to think too hard because we just want to make sure that they're getting the update that everybody else gets.
Yeah. You know, what's great about this idea too is that there are people at companies that spend all day upgrading production. And imagine that you could actually have your customer do it for you. Imagine if you were, I mean, you were in that
Yeah.
situation, but for our audience members, imagine you're in a situation where your automation is so rigid and there's so little problems that you could actually allow your customers to choose when to hit the button, let them hit the button, and then you're only notified when a problem happens. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a beautiful world.
The original system design for this whole system was that none of us at this company actually touch the system. The iPhone example is perfect. People just had their product. They pressed the buttons that did the things they thought
Yeah.
would work, and it all just
Yeah.
worked.
So you mentioned something a little bit ago, and one of what you were saying was that this platform was installed at all the sites. So I'm assuming you guys had some sort of physical compute system inside of every single place that these robots were running. And your platform was actually running on all of those physical systems as well. Was there a cloud component? And why wasn't it fully cloud?
A good question. So, part of it, the initial design from a lot of robotics companies is cloud second. They know physically the product that they have in their hand, and they don't want to complicate it with a cloud component. Now, it didn't really make sense because with a lot of embedded products, we couldn't have 2-second lag. People wanted 400 millisecond lag. The system pauses for 2 seconds
Yeah.
and people start freaking out.
Yeah.
It's almost like if you have your coffee machine connected to the cloud and you press the button and it waits like 3 seconds before it tells you if it started brewing your coffee. People start thinking, hey, is this thing broken? Right now, maybe you get
Yeah.
used to it.
Yeah.
But to make the numbers work for the system in terms of responsiveness, everything had to be on-prem. Ultimately, we were one of the first things that went from cloud out.
Yeah.
So everything was coming into the cloud. It was data, metrics, all coming into the cloud so that people could aggregate it and whatnot. We were the first thing that said, hey, how do we get all the sites to have the same code everywhere?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the solution that we thought of is a little bit silly, but our our feeling was that this tool that we had developed at the sites
Yeah.
to update any device, we could just make one of these in the cloud to update any one of those individual tools. And the thing that we cared about was how do we make our deployments easy? Because the sites were still theoretically run by the individual sites. So at this point, we have a lot more sites now. And I'm more concerned about how do we as the platform team get our tool out to each of these sites. Our system design said the sites control what's at the individual site.
Mm,
You guys don't control it from the cloud. That changed at a point though, where they said, actually, we want to make sure that all the same stuff is at every single site,
mm,
which isn't a bad plan,
yeah,
but it was a different way of thinking about it. And so they said, hey, you've been updating all these different sites. Your thing is standard across these different sites. How about you use your tool to update everything at each site? With these sites, they have individual like maintenance windows. They have like a
yeah,
2 hour window where the system isn't operating, and you have to do a lot of coordination with the sites. But so there was a lot of complicating factors here in
yeah,
making this actually work to update all the different sites. But what people wanted was a tool where you could go and in the cloud press one button or change one value and have that get down to every single site. We were a push-based system, so somebody has to physically press the button um, to get the stuff out to the different sites. And I think the Apple method, right, which is more of a pull method, right?
yeah,
We're gonna pull the data in, and then the individual at the site is going to press their button to update on their own time. I think
yeah,
our system was a little bit too rigid, being a push-based system,
yeah.
to actually fully adapt to the end world where they wanted more pulls.
So you used this product to update itself at all of these sites. But what did you use to update the main one?
Around the time that we had developed this product, we switched from Bitbucket to GitLab, and there was a lot of choices that went into why we used GitLab instead of GitHub or anything else. But one of the reasons that we used GitLab was it had the ability to automate pipelines so that you could actually individual repos could go in and push their code somewhere else. And at this point, I had started to learn like what DevOps was. And we had somebody come to the company. They said, I'm a DevOps guy. And I said, what's DevOps? And he gave me a lot of crap for not knowing what DevOps was. But
Hmm.
I feel like DevOps was one of these terms that was thrown around a lot.
In my mind, a platform engineer is a type of DevOps person. It embodies the mentality of DevOps. So you were embodying DevOps, but you didn't even know it existed. And I think that's the purest form of DevOps, honestly. That's amazing.
There are times where you say, oh, what was the first like robot, for instance?
Yeah.
And there's an example of like something from like 1700s
Yeah.
because people are like, well, technically these people came to this idea before it was a widespread idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
At that point, there was enough around like automation online, right? I think you get embedded into the automation world. I don't know when the term platform engineer actually came around, and just like a lot of DevOps concepts, I think it means different things to different people.
Yeah.
But um, but yeah, we hired people who had more of a DevOps background, and I learned a lot actually after that
Yeah.
point because I hadn't been thinking about it. I'd been focusing on my tool and how the end
Yeah.
users were getting out
Yeah.
of what they were getting out of it. And
Yeah.
at that point, getting the formal understanding of like what DevOps is, I think really helps.
One of the last few questions I wanted to ask you started at this startup from the beginning. You evolved from this developer to this platform engineering role. Platform engineering kind of took off there, and you built out not only just for robot updating, but for the entire place updating and getting to this perfect world where the customer updates. If you had to start all over again, if you had some advice to someone who is in a startup right now, I guess the first question is how early can DevOps start? Should it start right away? Or is it okay to not have the idea of DevOps right away? And at what point do you start introducing it?
So it does come down to the company and what you're doing with robotics. Making that robot work matters way more than does the code get to the robot successfully. Those things do matter, but you're always making trade-offs. When
Yeah.
everybody's working 12 and 14-hour days,
Yeah.
you're constantly deciding what's the actual trade-off that I care about. And so there is a bit of a gut feeling here. Are we at a point where this takes up a significant chunk of time?
That
If we're
makes
doing the
sense.
prototyping phase and we have 6 devices, don't focus on
Yeah.
how the code gets to the thing, because it's going to be taking you 10 minutes of your day or 10
Yeah.
minutes every time that you're doing it. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But there is going to be a point where that scale tips and you say, we've been doing it this way for a year,
Yeah.
but now that we have 20 devices, it's not really working anymore. Realizing that moment is, we were definitely late to that moment. We
Hmm.
got to the point
Yeah.
where we had a lot more devices
Yeah.
that we were updating, and people said, well, that's just how we do it.
Yeah.
And there was no questioning that. It was canon. People been doing it like that for years. I think a lot of industries do fall into that trap where that's the way it's always been done.
Yeah.
So with a startup, you don't want to do it right away. I think the DevOps mentality of think about how the whole system is going to be working is good, and you want to have that in your mind,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't be a day one activity. I wouldn't hire my first DevOps person when the company hasn't built its first robot.
Yeah. So essentially, you're suggesting keeping track of how much time is wasted with manual work. And once it gets maybe a little too out of hand, that's when you start thinking about doing DevOps and
There's a
thinking about,
threshold. Yeah, and I think that threshold is going to be a little bit different based on your project.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you touched upon it exactly. And I think it's really when it starts affecting your ROI. Once it starts affecting your customers and your customers are getting upset and you're starting to lose money, I mean, arguably, it might even be a little too late at that point.
Right,
Right.
That's
Right.
the thing that's hard
That's
is,
tough. That's tough. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, do you fix a road before it's caused 10 accidents when you
Yeah.
see the problem? Or do
Yeah.
you say, hey, we've already had 5 accidents, we should probably fix the road now,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes you can say, hey, we're thinking about this. We think it's going to be a problem. Yeah, and DevOps, in this case, it's not that serious. We're not actually dealing with human lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are. Everything does, right?
Yeah.
Wasted
I mean,
time is
you can't say
serious.
that. There might be some listeners in an industry where there are lives on the line,
No, no,
and
that's that.
that could be a great another next episode.
I mean, we should talk about that. I think I have
Mm.
a lot of thoughts. But
Should you DevOps an elevator?
should you DevOps an elevator? Um, what I would say is I would probably wait until, like, when you have a lot of experience, you can see the pain just as it's starting to happen. I wouldn't solve it before it's happened, because I think that unless this is like a serious safety issue, but I wouldn't solve it before it's happened because there's probably other more important things to work on. But there becomes a point where, again, that tips and it becomes a lot more important to actually solve the DevOps problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, the hardest part about convincing a company early on that you need DevOps is that they don't even understand the concept. They're like, we're a robot company. We're not a
Yeah.
software company. We
Well,
don't
and
need to care about the software.
I think the proof is in the pudding with your story. I don't think anyone listening should try to convince their company to do DevOps. I think they should look at their problems, get those problems down on paper, and say, hey, this is how we solve it. Don't ever say DevOps. Say, I want to create a platform that can simplify this for the end user so that we can deploy faster. And if we deploy faster, we can make a lot more money. And that's the thing. I think that's why you guys were so successful at bringing platform engineering into the company. There was no question of, yes, we're going to do this. There was a very clear problem and you knew how to solve it.
One thing I'll say that also helped us be successful, and we can talk about whether or not it's too successful, but we cared so much about our end user that they were our biggest advocate the entire time. There would
Hmm.
be people who would come in and they would say, we need to use this newfangled new thing, right? And we kept trying to have like a modern solution. People say we shouldn't be using our own homegrown system. We should go and develop, we should go buy something out there that exists. And I didn't really disagree with them. I said, hey, if you can find something that the users jive with,
Yeah.
let's do it. Let's do
Yeah.
it. But the problem was is that it was one of the things that the people at the site said, I love this thing. You would go incognito. They didn't know you worked on this product. They would
Yeah.
be teaching this thing to new people and they would say, and this is our tool that updates everything. It's great. It's going to be your best
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah.
And
I
that
mean,
was
that's,
the hardest thing to actually have the
I think
company deal with.
there's another really important lesson in there for the audience members. You made it so that the product was irreplaceable. And you did that because you listened to the customer early and often and you built it around their needs. And so there was better products out there. Arguably switching fully over to GitLab probably would have been better for a lot of people. But no one wanted to do it because the product that you built was catered for them and they just loved it so much. I mean, that is, I think, right there, a perfect lesson that I think every company should hear. How do you make a product that's irreplaceable? And Apple did it, and Google did it with their search engine. You guys did it with your deployment platform. That's the perfect recipe right there, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a very fun project. I loved working on it, and I loved honestly the experience, and I'd love to have the experience again where we just sit with the developer, or we sit with the end users and say, "Hey, how are you liking this?" I came from a background of video games too before this, and that was the most important thing with video games too.
Yeah.
It was watching how people use your thing. So,
And that is why everyone loves working at startups. Well, at least people who love working at startups love working at startups because they're the closest to the customers they can be. Yeah.
that's a good point. That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but you don't get caught in the corporate mess of it.
Yeah.
This
You
is
don't get abstracted away as much.
yeah. Yeah, where you're like, "Oh, we have 100,000 customers and you'll never see them." Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Josh, for this very enlightening interview. I think we learned so much about platform engineering, and it's very clear you have fantastic experience not only in platform engineering but robotics. So, thank you very much for that.
Yeah, anytime.
So, that is the end of Containerized Conversations. I am your co-host Jesse Caffarelli.
And I'm Josh Warhurst, and we will see you next time.
You have a good night, everyone.